Welcome guys! Welcome back to another video. Today, no trailer, you know. Uh, Today we're gonna do another video, this time on Charlemagne, The Rise. I've seen other YouTubers doing reactions to this. Apparently it's really popular nowadays. I don't know, it looks interesting. I know a good amount about Charlemagne, only from Crusader Kings though, the video game. That's how I know my 8th century geography, by the way, you know. Uh, But yeah, I know that he basically was the first Holy Roman Emperor, and then the title sort of fell out of favor, and then Otto the First in the ninth century, well, in 1800, in 800, revived the title. I know that. Um, but Charlemagne is a very interesting figure. I don't know that much about his rise. I know he conquered Francia and Germany and Italy. He made quite a conquest, but I don't know that much about him. I know a good amount, like as much as anybody else, I guess. But I'm not that well learned regarding Charlemagne. So this will be new for me, new for everybody. I hope you enjoy my video or like reaction, like, subscribe, and yeah, let's start.
Charlemagne was arguably one of the most outstanding leaders of all times, if expansion and change are to be the measures of greatness. Indeed, Charlemagne, or Charles I, is acknowledged and celebrated as Charles the Great, the king, and later the emperor who united Western Europe in the Holy Roman Empire. Crowned king in 768, within 6 years he was celebrating the title of King of Italy. By 800, Pope Leo III declared him Emperor of the Romans.
Ah, so they crowned Charlemagne in 800, the Holy Roman Emperor. But I know the title sort of fell away and then was reclaimed by Otto I sometimes later.
He extended his power and authority and unified Western Europe under his tutelage.
Jesus
the
Christ,
empire that died 3 centuries earlier was revived, restored, and...
Look at this one. Look at this. I mean, it's basically the Western Roman Empire. And this guy was able to reconquer everything. He's basically the Napoleon of the 8th century.
Adapted to meet the most expansive ambitions of the new dynasty. And just like Charlemagne possessed exceptional skills in running an empire, you too can acquire a very particular set of skills on Skillshare.
That's fine.
Well, maybe not those kinds of...
That's fine. That's fine. That's really fine.
Charlemagne was born around 747.
Okay.
His father Pepin the Short and his mother Bertrada of Laon were king and queen of the Franks until Pepin died in 768.
Okay.
Pepin divided his legacy between Charlemagne and his brother Carloman, who ruled jointly but controlled their areas of influence. Charlemagne inherited the outer part of the kingdom, including West Aquitaine, North Austrasia, and Neustria. At the same time, the younger brother took the inner part, including southern Austrasia, Septimania, eastern Aquitaine, Burgundy, Provence, and Swabia. The expectation was that each would continue to negotiate. Yeah,
Charlemagne dies, by the way.
their responsibilities. However, it all changed with the death of Carloman in 771. While Europe had wallowed in darkness and despair, Charlemagne fixed the new beginning of a religious, educational, and cultural transformation. His first task was military expansion. He spent 30 years from 772 conquering new lands, spreading Christianity, and establishing unity under his protection. Charlemagne led battles, taking up his position as leader of the Skara, or military elite, throughout his campaigns. The first and most significant of Charlemagne's crusades was the settling of the Lombards.
Never mind.
The capture of the lands to the north of Italy bore additional...
what's interesting is that the Lombards were German. They were not Italian at all.
responsibility because of assurances given by his father, Pepin. In 771, the new Pope Adrian I demanded the return of lands, only to see King Desiderius of the Lombards retaliate and drive his way through papal cities onto Pentapolis and Rome.
Don't demand shit.
Adrian appealed to Charlemagne to support him and honor his father's commitments. He called a conference at Thionville, where Charlemagne threw his weight behind the Pope and demanded that Desiderius comply. The ensuing confrontation saw Charlemagne and Bernard advance across the Alps. Together they drove the Lombards back to Pavia before engaging with them and finally declaring their victory in 774. Charlemagne firmly supported the papacy, upholding his father's commitment and accepting the title of patrician in a visit to the Pope. He returned to Pavia in triumph, granting amnesty to those who opposed him and declaring his victory. His campaigning defined his future ambitions for territorial expansion and established his future relationship with the Church of Rome.
Saxon Wars and beyond.
Charlemagne's campaign...
Dude, the guy conquered Italy way faster than I expected, man. The guy just swept in, took over, left.
of expansion and his religious devotion did not stop with the victory over the Lombards. In 773, he set his sights on conquering the Saxon lands and bringing the true Christian faith to the many Saxons and beyond. He conducted no less than 18 battles and persevered for over 30 years.
Campaigned for 30 years, led 18 major battles. People back then, man, they lived. They lived! Like, what's really insane to me is that, 800 years later, Henry V would conquer half of France, ended up dying of, disease. How come these guys didn't die from disease? Charlemagne, 30 years, 18 battles, no disease.
Years to achieve this goal. His strength lay in his skills as a military leader and meticulous planner, and his investment in the preparation and training of his troops. His Saxon campaign spanned the Germanic lands. His first victory was against the Engrians in 773. However, stretching his armies too thinly halted his ambitions in the north for 2 years, while he consolidated his position in Italy. In 775, he regrouped and laid siege to Westphalia at Sigeberg. Charlemagne marched through Engria to the eastern borders with Eastphalia, claiming further victory over the Saxons and bringing the leader Hesse to the Christian faith. To establish dominance over the area, he set up permanent bases at Sigeberg and Freiburg. But Charlemagne's interests in Italy made it difficult for him to consolidate his hold over Saxony. While
Wait. Did the guy just, casually walk over the Alps?
he was busy crushing the Dukes of Friuli and Spoleto, the Saxons were rising in rebellion under the leadership of Widukind. Charlemagne returned not only to suppress the uprising in 776 and set up a new camp in Karlstadt, but to drive Widukind away to Denmark and absorb Saxony into the Frankish kingdom.
Nice.
He set up a new national assembly at Paderborn and began the conversion of the Saxons to Christianity.
Nice.
But Charlemagne's ambition did not...
He's basically convert or burn alive.
...not stop there. He pushed forward to southern Germany, defeated the Avars and invaded northern Spain, driving the Moors into submission. By 800, he dominated an area over today's Germany, France, Switzerland, Belgium, the Netherlands, and parts of Austria, Hungary, and Spain. He established a new united Europe under the spiritual ascendancy of Christianity.
That's insane. The coronation, I know about the coronation. I confused the coronation with that of Otto I, who eventually revives. I think he revives the Holy Roman Empire in 968. I know technically the Holy Roman Empire was created in the year 800. I think it was on New Year's Eve or something like a very special day. But then, like the Holy Roman Empire dies, and then it gets revived. I think in 968. Don't quote me. I'm not sure about that.
The next significant event for Charlemagne was his coronation as Emperor of the Romans.
Hmm.
In 795, Pope Adrian died and was succeeded by Pope Leo III. Leo, whose lack of popularity in Rome forced him to hide behind the protection of Charlemagne, was eager to retain papal authority within the expanding Carolingian Empire. It was a shrewd political move. By crowning Charlemagne as emperor, he
Yeah.
set precedents for crowning all
Yeah.
emperors and holding on to papal influence.
That's very important because if Charlemagne gets crowned by his own bishop at home somewhere in Francia, the future emperors later on down the line, they won't really need to go to Rome to listen to Rome, to the Pope. Why should they? You know. Whereas if the Pope crowns, first of all, prestige, but second of all, it gives a lot of power to the popes because if you want to get crowned, you have to come to the Pope. You can't even get crowned by your own bishop, you know. So
At the same time, Charlemagne expanded his authority across the newly established Holy Roman Empire.
yeah.
On Christmas Day of the year 800, Charlemagne
Day.
found himself in Rome. The tale goes that he knelt to pray at the altar of St. Peter's Basilica, and Leo
Beautiful
placed a
painting.
crown on his head, announcing Imperator Romanorum. In doing so, Pope Leo III declared the reign of Empress Irene of Constantinople to be unfounded, the Byzantine Empire to be without substance.
Lol.
As historian James Bryce
That's
writes,
hilarious.
when Odoacer compelled the abdication of Romulus Augustulus, he did not abolish the Western Empire as a separate power. Still, he caused it to be reunited with or sink into the Eastern, so that from that time there was a single undivided Roman Empire. Pope Leo III and Charlemagne, like their predecessors, held the Roman Empire to be one and indivisible, and proposed by the coronation of Charlemagne not to proclaim a severance of the East and West. Charlemagne humbly declared himself surprised and unprepared for the accolade bestowed on him. However, he soon adapted to the magnitude of his new role. His target was to embody the notion of continuous empire from Augustus to Constantine VI. His ambition was to reunite Europe and was thwarted.
You know, it's insane how in the year 800, how much Europe is pretty, united. You know, you have one big empire in the west, one big empire, moderately big in the east, and of course you have a bunch of empires in the middle. But it's not as divided as nowadays. Nowadays there's like 50 countries in the middle.
Only by the equally prestigious Byzantine Empire and its Empress Irene. She ruled despite the lack of acknowledgement by the Pope and Charlemagne. The legacy lasted for almost a millennium, and alongside the Byzantine Empire, which equally claimed rights over the title of Emperor. Charlemagne never claimed sovereign authority over the Byzantine.
I mean, technically, sorry I'm pausing, but technically the Roman Empire survived it in 1806, if you think about it. Because while the Eastern Roman Empire fell in 1453, the whole Roman Empire, in one way or the other, survived. You can say survived, technically survived, until 1806. Now, granted, by 1806, it was a shell of itself. Let's be honest. And then after Charlemagne, the Holy Roman Empire with its electoral duchies and princelings, and it's a whole mess. It's a mess, But the name and the legacy behind it. So technically, the Roman Empire. I might be wrong here. The Western Roman Empire survived in 476, and then the East until 1453, and then somehow the West got revived under the Holy Roman Empire in 800, and then survived in 1806. So did the Roman Empire, in one way, shape, or form, if you want to be really out there, survive it in 1806? But then, granted, it wasn't really the same. It was just the name and the legacy. But
Empire, and Byzantium never acknowledged his sovereignty of the Holy Roman Empire. His coronation established two empires rather than one unbroken line from the days of Augustus to those of Constantine VI. A united empire was unattainable unless both powerhouses locked swords. Many supporters of Charlemagne argued against the legitimacy of a Byzantine empire led by a woman. Byzantium equally felt threatened by Frankish claims to the Roman Empire. East and West were set apart and in conflict.
I mean, technically, the Eastern Roman has a way better claim to the title, but.
When the Pope declared Charlemagne as Holy Roman Emperor, there was an enormous shift in the power base of Europe. Now the Pope and the leader of the Franks collaborated and controlled lands as far south as Rome and challenged the right of Byzantium. The Greeks dominated the Byzantine Empire, and their power base lay in Constantinople. Traditionally, they held the title of Roman Emperor and exercised the only right to judge over the papacy. Declaring for Charlemagne, the Pope turned his back on the authority of Byzantium and the power of Constantinople.
Which is hilarious.
Historian John Julius Norwich writes of their motivation. By whom, however, could he, the Pope, be tried? In normal circumstances, the only conceivable answer to that question would have been the emperor at Constantinople. But the imperial throne was at this moment occupied by Irene. The empress was notorious for having blinded and murdered her own son in the minds of both Leo and Charles.
Whoa!
But this fact was
almost
propaganda. Immaterial. It was enough that she was a woman. The female sex was thought to be incapable of governing, and by the old Salic tradition was debarred from doing so. As far as Western Europe was concerned, the throne of the emperors was vacant. Irene's claim to it was merely an additional proof, if any were needed, of the degradation into which the so-called Roman Empire had fallen.
You want to talk about sexism?
It may be that the Pope never really expected to achieve harmony with Constantinople. Relationships between the Pope and Byzantium were fractious since early in the century. By 750, the influence of the Byzantines in Rome and southern Italy was limited. The papacy opposed the destruction of Christian icons, which was central to the laws of Constantinople. And then, politically, the questionable leadership of Irene led the Pope to declare that there was no living emperor when he anointed Charlemagne. In crowning Charlemagne emperor, Pope Leo effectively gave the church authority over the empire and turned away from the Byzantines. Norwich further explains that by crowning Charlemagne, the Pope arrogated to himself the right to appoint the Emperor of the Romans, establishing the imperial crown as his gift, but simultaneously granting himself implicit superiority over the Emperor whom he had created.
Yeah, it's very, very, very smart. Now, granted, in a long scheme of things, the Pope, who what was his name? Leo III. I hope I'm right. We just talked about the guy, but he won't really, how many popes is he gonna crown himself? He's gonna die. The popes lived 10-20 years, especially back then. But it gave the church overall a lot of power over the next millennia, basically, because every emperor wanted, not only emperor, but had to be crowned by the Pope for legitimacy purposes. You could be crowned by your own bishop, but it doesn't look as whereas other monarchs in Europe, that was a huge gift, or I should say, like if you did something incredible for the Christian faith, you'd be crowned by the Pope because it's very prestigious.
And because the Byzantines had proved so unsatisfactory from every point of view, political, military, and doctrinal, he would select a Westerner, the one man who by his wisdom and statesmanship and the vastness of his dominions stood out head and shoulders above his contemporaries.
Yeah, I think the vastness of his dominions really played the key role here, but
Faced with conflict and knowing that it was unlikely that the Byzantines would even accept a Frankish king as their emperor, Charlemagne declared himself the renewer of the Roman Empire. A new unity based on Christian faith would replace the unity of Roman citizenship. Throughout the Middle Ages, the two empires remained opposed. The title of emperor would pass through the generations of Frankish kings ordained by the popes. Over time, the Carolingians would lose their supremacy through fights within their own,
yeah,
and their dominance
that's how empire all fall within themselves. I think I'm pretty sure I'm right here, but when Charlemagne dies, the empire gets fractured again, and it gets split between his sons. So, if you want to be, if you want to destroy an empire, you don't have to fight it. If you attack an empire, especially at its full strength as it is right now, your chances of winning slim. Just wait till the head honcho, so to speak, dies, and then the squabbling within the family starts. That's when he destroyed the empire.
would subside. The popes would look to other Italian leaders who would happily endorse the power of the papacy and act as its protector. By 924, the title Holy Roman Emperor was lost, but revived in 962 by Otto I.
I was close. 964, 962, pretty close. Pretty close. Otto the First. That's right.
Who styled himself as the heir to Charlemagne.
Yeah.
And the title would remain for 1,000 years.
Yeah.
To recap,
1906.
Charlemagne was determined to expand his realm and spread Christianity across Europe. To this end, he embarked on a 30-year military campaign
That's
of
insane.
conquest.
30 years, man.
By the year 800, he controlled Western Europe, including present-day France, Switzerland, Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, and parts of Austria and Spain. The coronation in 800 AD extended his authority, and he used the circumstances to claim he was the restorer of the Roman Empire, which would continue to exist for nearly 1,000 years in the form of the Holy Roman Empire.
Well, between the death of Charlemagne and Otto the First, there's like a century where the Holy Roman Empire sort of falls away. But then it returned, and then it returns with all the drama. Because the initial Holy Roman Empire under Charlemagne, it wasn't a bunch of duchies scrabbling over who's going to be the next one. No, no, no. He was the Roman Emperor, and then his sons. That was the idea. Otto the First created, poof, this whole you have to see a map of the Holy Roman Empire in the 15th century. It's a mess. It's a mess. I mean, when Charles V ended up taking over, which talk about the power of inheritance. Okay, the guy became like the king of Holland when he was 2 years old, and inherited the Duchy of Austria and then Spain. He became like one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful monarchs in Europe at the time, which is very interesting because at the same time he was alive during the times of Francis I of France and Henry VIII. We all know Henry, with that. But yeah, it's very interesting. I think we're gonna make a series on the 15th century, 16th century. I love those periods. I actually have a book on the mother of Henry VII, Margaret de Beaufort, which is an incredible woman. Go research her if you want to learn more. It's very interesting.
The Pope's motivation for crowning Charlemagne was to give the papacy and the church implicit authority over the empire and gain security from the emperor.
Very smart from the Pope's point of view.
Next up, we will cover Charlemagne's reforms and the beginning of the Carolingian Renaissance.
Anywho, guys, thank you for watching. If you did, leave a like. I'll finish the video, of course. We'll do the part 2. And if you liked it, all that, subscribe, like. And yeah, I hope you like my reaction. See you guys next time.